In 2017, a Burkinabe University student asked a French president a question that should have had an easy answer. Why does our university have no electricity? Emmanuel Macron's response became one of the most replayed, most resented exchanges in modern Francophone African political history. He told her with visible irritation that fixing her university's light bulbs was not France's job. That responsibility, he said, belonged to her own president. The comment was technically accurate and politically devastating because it crystallized in a single dismissive sentence exactly how the post-colonial relationship between France and its former territories actually worked. 8 years later, the universities of Burkina Faso look different. Solar arrays sit on rooftops that once depended entirely on an unreliable national grid. New campuses are being built with dedicated power infrastructure designed in from the first blueprint. Regional university hospitals are rising with their own integrated power generation, ensuring that medical training and treatment never again depend on whether the wider grid happens to be functioning that day. And this is, by every available indication, only the beginning of a much larger educational infrastructure transformation. This is the story of how a single dismissive comment about light bulbs became the foundation for rethinking what a Burkinabe university actually needs to function. Let's return to the specific moment that started this entire narrative, because the details matter. During a 2017 visit to Ouagadougou, President Emmanuel Macron addressed a gathering that included Burkinabe University students. The setting itself carried symbolic weight. A French head of state speaking directly to the next generation of Burkinabe intellectual and professional leadership, in a country where French remains the official language, and French cultural and economic influence remain deeply embedded in national institutions decades after formal independence. A student in the audience raised her hand and asked a question that, on its surface, sounds almost mundane. Why does our university not have reliable electricity? It was not a hostile question. It was a direct, practical inquiry from someone living the daily reality of trying to study, conduct laboratory work, and access digital research resources inside an institution where consistent power was not guaranteed. Macron's response shifted the entire tone of the exchange. You speak to me as if I were still a colonial power, but I don't want to be dealing with electricity in the universities of Burkina Faso. That's the job of your president. He went further, adding a joke about the Burkinabe president having stepped out of the room, suggesting perhaps he had gone to go fix the air conditioning himself. The room's reaction, scattered uncomfortable laughter, barely masked the underlying tension the comment exposed, because the question of who was actually responsible for Burkinabe University infrastructure was not a simple matter of post-colonial sovereignty in the abstract. It was tangled up in decades of continued French economic influence through the CFA franc monetary system, continued French corporate presence in Burkinabe infrastructure and resource sectors, and a broader pattern in which major infrastructure projects, including university construction and expansion, frequently depended on foreign development financing that came with its own conditions, delays, and priorities that did not always align with what Burkinabe students and faculty actually needed. To understand why Macron's response generated lasting resentment rather than fading as a minor diplomatic awkwardness, you need to understand the deeper history it was tapping into. For over 60 years following formal independence, Burkina Faso's relationship with France retained significant structural continuity with the colonial arrangement that preceded it. France controlled the CFA franc, the currency used across 14 West African nations, retaining effective veto power over key monetary policy decisions. French companies maintained significant presence across Burkinabe mining, infrastructure, and resource extraction sectors. French development assistance, while substantial in absolute terms, frequently arrived bundled with conditions. French contractor preferences and priorities set in Paris rather than Ouagadougou. In this context, Macron's comment, "Your president's job, not mine," rang hollow to many Burkinabe listeners, precisely because the broader structural relationship between the two countries made it considerably more complicated than a simple binary of full French responsibility versus full Burkinabe responsibility. The CFA franc arrangement constrained Burkinabe monetary independence in ways that directly affected the government's capacity to finance domestic infrastructure projects, including university expansion and electrification, without resorting to foreign-denominated borrowing carrying foreign conditions. French corporate presence in Burkinabe mining meant that a significant portion of the country's mineral wealth that properly captured domestically, could have funded exactly the kind of university infrastructure investment the student was asking about, was instead flowing to shareholders in France and elsewhere under historically favorable extraction terms. Macron's comment, in other words, asked Burkina Faso to take full responsibility for outcomes within a system that France had played a substantial role in shaping and continued to benefit from, even as it declined responsibility for the outcomes that system produced. September 30th, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power, and the question of who was responsible for fixing Burkina Faso's infrastructure, universities included, received a definitive, if unexpected, answer. We are. Traoré's government moved immediately and aggressively to dismantle the structural arrangement that had made Macron's dismissive framing possible in the first place. French military forces were expelled. Mining codes were revised to capture substantially more domestic value from gold extraction. The CFA-franc relationship, while not abandoned entirely, became the subject of increasingly direct sovereignty rhetoric, questioning whether continued French monetary influence served Burkinabe interests. Most directly relevant to the university electrification question specifically, the redirected gold mining revenue, the same capital stream that funded free tractors, road-building machinery, and irrigation infrastructure, was also explicitly directed toward energy sovereignty as a named national priority. Traoré's own framing made the connection between energy access and full national independence explicit and unambiguous. If you don't have food sovereignty, if you don't have energy sovereignty, if you don't have technological sovereignty, then you don't really have full independence. A university without reliable electricity is, by this framework, a university without genuine technological sovereignty, incapable of training the engineers, scientists, and professionals that every other dimension of Burkina Faso's broader transformation increasingly depends on. The practical response took the same form that has defined Burkina Faso's broader energy strategy: rapid decentralized solar deployment, rather than waiting for traditional grid expansion to eventually reach every institution that needed reliable power. This approach mirrors the solar infrastructure already proven across Burkina Faso's agricultural sector, where the Douro irrigation perimeter operates on a solar-powered pumping station delivering 9,720 cubic meters of water every single hour, and where the Bagre growth pole deploys solar pumps alongside automated irrigation systems and satellite monitoring across thousands of hectares. The same modular, rapidly deployable solar technology that transformed irrigation access in the Sahel is now being applied to educational infrastructure, with rooftop and ground-mounted solar arrays installed at university facilities to provide reliable power independent of the broader national grid's historical inconsistency. This matters enormously for the specific kind of work that university electrification failures had historically disrupted most severely. Laboratory equipment requiring consistent power for sensitive experiments, computer systems, and digital research resources that simply cannot function through repeated, unpredictable outages. Evening study and research access for students whose daytime hours are frequently consumed by work or family responsibilities, making reliable evening lighting and power access a genuine educational equity issue, not merely a convenience. A university science laboratory that loses power mid-experiment does not simply experience an inconvenience. It loses the experiment entirely, along with the materials, time, and resources invested in it. For Burkinabe students and researchers working with already limited laboratory resources, this kind of power-related loss represented a recurring, structural barrier to serious scientific training and research output. The University Hospital Center of Gawa, the 300-bed medical facility we have examined as part of Burkina Faso's healthcare decentralization strategy, provides perhaps the clearest illustration of how energy sovereignty and educational infrastructure are being integrated from the design stage, rather than addressed as separate sequential problems. As a university hospital specifically, the Gawa facility combines advanced medical treatment capacity with medical education and training infrastructure, meaning its power requirements extend beyond keeping treatment equipment functioning to also supporting laboratory instruction, digital medical training resources, and the kind of consistent evening and overnight power access that medical education and residency training fundamentally require. The facility's integrated power infrastructure, developed as part of its broader construction rather than retrofitted afterward, reflects the lesson Burkina Faso's government appears to have drawn directly from the kind of dismissive comment Macron made in 2017. Do not build critical educational and medical infrastructure with the assumption that reliable grid power will simply be available when needed. Build the power generation capacity directly into the institution itself. This same principle appears in the broader urban development projects examined throughout Burkina Faso's transformation. Esquire City, the satellite housing development built for teachers, soldiers, nurses, and returning diaspora professionals, was designed from its first blueprint with independent solar power plants specifically intended to keep electricity running 24 hours a day. A design philosophy that extends naturally to the educational facilities, including land already designated for a future university, that are part of the broader Esquire City Development Plan. Even the Burkindi Business Center, the 35-story commercial tower rising in Ouagadougou, includes a dedicated mini power plant, and the broader complex's planning includes designated space for educational infrastructure, reflecting a consistent pattern. Energy independence and educational access are increasingly treated as inseparable design requirements across nearly every major Burkinabe development project, rather than separate considerations addressed independently of each other. Energy infrastructure represents only one dimension of a broader educational transformation taking shape across Burkina Faso, much of it directly connected to the same sovereignty-driven redirection of national resources examined throughout this broader documentary series. The transfer of agricultural engineers out of air-conditioned Ouagadougou offices and directly into rural farming cooperatives, complete with government-provided motorbikes specifically intended to ensure they could reach the most remote communities, represents a form of practical, field-based education that extends well beyond traditional classroom instruction, embedding technical expertise directly within the communities that need it most. This same philosophy of decentralizing both expertise and the infrastructure needed to develop it appears in the Gawa University Hospital's explicit mission to train medical professionals outside the capital, addressing the historical pattern in which aspiring Burkinabe doctors had to relocate to Ouagadougou for training, with many never returning to practice in the regions where they grew up. The digital economy ecosystem taking shape in Ouagadougou's commercial districts, fintech innovators, software developers, cybersecurity engineers, and young entrepreneurs building payment systems and locally driven platforms represents a form of practical technical education and skills development happening largely outside traditional university structures entirely, suggesting that Burkina Faso's broader educational transformation extends beyond formal institutional infrastructure into the kind of hands-on technical ecosystem that produces immediately employable skills. Land has already been designated for a future university connected to the broader Esquire City development, intended specifically to train what planners describe as the next generation of Burkinabe leaders, suggesting that the educational infrastructure expansion extends well beyond simply solving existing institutions' power problems into actively building entirely new educational capacity, designed around the sovereignty-driven development model from the ground up. The claim that Burkina Faso's educational infrastructure transformation represents only the beginning of a much larger trajectory is not simply promotional rhetoric. It follows directly from the pattern established across every other sector examined throughout this broader documentary series. The agricultural transformation began with relatively modest pilot programs. A 125-hectare experimental wheat plot in 2023 that few observers expected to succeed against 60 years of expert consensus that wheat could not grow in the Sahel, before scaling to the 6 million-ton annual cereal production and complete rice import independence achieved by 2026. The infrastructure transformation began with the initial 9-kilometer Ouagadougou pilot phase of the Faso-Mayabo road-building initiative, before scaling toward the 5,000-kilometer annual paving target that represents roughly 100 times Burkina Faso's historical road construction pace. If Burkina Faso's educational infrastructure transformation follows this same trajectory, starting with solar power deployment at existing institutions and the integrated power infrastructure built into new facilities like the Gawa University Hospital, before scaling toward the kind of comprehensive, nationwide educational infrastructure expansion that the broader sovereignty framework consistently points toward, the implications extend well beyond simply ensuring university laboratories no longer lose power mid-experiment. It suggests a Burkina Faso in which the entire pipeline of technical and professional education, from primary schooling through university research and specialized medical and engineering training, increasingly operates independent of the grid reliability and foreign financing constraints that historically limited what Burkinabe students and institutions could accomplish. It is worth pausing to consider what has happened in the 8 years since that 2017 exchange, not just in terms of national policy, but in terms of the specific generational cohort the student who asked Macron her question actually represented. A Burkinabe University student in 2017 would by 2026 be entering the prime years of early to mid-career professional development, precisely the demographic now being actively recruited into the engineering, agronomy, medical, and technical roles that Burkina Faso's broader transformation has generated at unprecedented scale. The diaspora return and youth retention patterns examined as part of Burkina Faso's broader transformation suggest that young Burkinabe professionals, including those who may have left the country during the period when university infrastructure failures like unreliable electricity represented a genuine barrier to serious technical training, are increasingly finding reasons to return or remain, as the infrastructure that once pushed them toward emigration is being systematically rebuilt. There is a particular symbolic resonance in the fact that the same generational cohort, whose university experience was shaped by exactly the kind of infrastructure failure Macron dismissed as not his problem, is now the generation most directly positioned to benefit from and contribute to the infrastructure transformation that followed. The question asked in 2017 did not receive its answer from Paris. It received its answer 8 years later from a generation of Burkinabe engineers, agronomists, and technical professionals building the solar arrays, the irrigation systems, and the integrated power infrastructure that now keeps the lights on in the very institutions where that question was first asked. In 2017, Emmanuel Macron told a Burkinabe University student that fixing her school's lack of electricity was not France's responsibility. He was, in the narrowest technical sense, correct. It was never France's job. But for over 60 years, the broader structural relationship between France and Burkina Faso made it extraordinarily difficult for that responsibility to belong fully to anyone else either. Trapping basic infrastructure like university electrification inside a foreign financing apparatus, a constrained monetary system, and a resource extraction arrangement that systematically limited Burkina Faso's capacity to fund its own solutions. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government dismantled that structural arrangement, piece by piece, and redirected the resulting nationalized resource wealth directly into the kind of energy sovereignty that makes university electrification a solved problem, rather than a recurring crisis. Solar arrays now sit on campus rooftops. The Gaoua University Hospital rises with integrated power infrastructure built directly into its design. Esquire City's planned university and the broader Burkindi Business Center's educational space are being developed with energy independence as a foundational design principle, not an afterthought. This is, by every indication available, only the beginning. The same trajectory that took Burkina Faso from importing 70% of its rice to halting all rice imports entirely. That took the country from 56 kilometers of paved road per year to a 5,000-kilometer annual target now appears to be unfolding across the educational infrastructure that trains the engineers, doctors, and scientists who will build everything that comes next. Macron said fixing the light bulbs was not his job. He was right. It was always Burkina Faso's job. And 8 years later, the lights are staying on.